I expect that you're watching this video because you're interested in electronically assisted astronomy. And in particular, you want to know which live stacking software you should use to do EAA. Well, if you've watched any of my other videos on EAA or read any of the blogs on my website, californiaskies.com, about electronically assisted astronomy, you'll see that I pretty much always recommend SharpCap software. Well, SharpCap is the most complete live stacking software available out there. It has all of the features that you need to be successful with live stacking, and amazingly, it's free. I can upgrade to a version of SharpCap that has a lot of additional features that can be helpful for EAA and also helpful for astrophotography, polar alignment, and so on. But you don't really need those features to do EAA. The free version has pretty much everything you need to get started and to be successful. But if there's one complaint about SharpCap that I've seen consistent, that's because of all those features, it has a steep learning curve and can cause a beginner to give up in frustration. Now, there's a lot of other software packages out there. There's ASI Live, there's TubeSky, Rising Cam, and so on and so forth. And they also are free and have a fair number of features in them, although ASI Live is actually a fairly simple version of live stacking software itself. But the one version of live stacking software that I think is the easiest to use and understand, the one where I think you can get up and running in less than 5 minutes, is the live stack feature in the SkyX Pro Edition. Now, I certainly don't recommend that you go out and buy the SkyX Pro Edition just for their live stack feature, because the SkyX is almost $400, and that's just way too much to pay for any software to do EAA. And in fact, as I said, you can get all that other software pretty much for free. But if you happen to have a copy of the SkyX Pro Edition, or if you're thinking of purchasing it because you want to use it to control your mount, your camera, your focuser, you want it to be your planetarium program, to do astrophotography and all of those other things, then you might want to take a look at the live stack feature in it. I think it is about the simplest version out there and will get you some stellar results in under 5 minutes. Now, in this video, I'm going to take you through the live stack features in the SkyX Pro Edition. I'm going to be using my 11-inch with the Hyperstar. Obviously, I'll be able to get some pretty spectacular results in short order, since this has a focal ratio of f1.9 using the Hyperstar, and I have a fairly large aperture. But even if you have a smaller refractor like this 61mm refractor from SharpStar, you'll still be able to do some pretty remarkable EAA, and the live stack feature of the SkyX will still be just as easy to use. All right, so let's take a look at the live stack feature in the SkyX Professional Edition. So you first have to open the SkyX Professional Edition. You need to go to the camera tab, and you need to connect your camera. And so that may mean, if you haven't done this before, that you have to go in and to the camera setup and choose which camera you have. So you see there are quite a range of cameras: QHY, Starlight Express, ZWO, and if your camera's not listed but it has an ASCOM driver, you can probably connect to it via ASCOM. I'm using the ZWO ASI camera, so say OK, and then I can simply click here to connect. It will connect. Close that. So you see the status is ready on the camera. And then we have to go to this Take Photo tab, not this tab, not this tab, but the Take Photo tab. And then we go here to Live Stack. So this brings up the live stacking feature. And you see there's a big area here to display the image. Over here are the camera controls, and there are two main tabs: the Exposure tab and the Calibration Frames tab. Now, we don't need to worry about Calibration Frames tab when you first start, but what it will do is it will allow you to do dark frame subtraction if you want to, It'll also allow you to do flat frame correction. So it allows you to make the darks, make the flat frames, and then use those to adjust and calibrate the live stack image. But when you're first starting out, you can just totally ignore that and still do a very good job of collecting images, and then you can advance to the calibration frames later. So here are the camera controls. This is the exposure tab. So if I click on that, you see there's some presets. There's 10 seconds, there's 60 seconds. If I wanted something that's not there, I could just simply go there, type in 75 seconds if that's what I wanted. Now I would recommend usually starting with a short exposure, and the reason for that is the short exposures put less strain on the polar alignment of your mount and also the quality of the gears in your mount. So you don't have to have a very expensive mount like my Software Abyss mount. You can have a less expensive mount but take shorter exposures that you're going to stack. And if you stack 12 5-second exposures, the image quality will be pretty much the same as you were able to stack one 60-second exposure. But let's say you were on an Alt-Az mount. If you go 60 seconds in some areas of the sky, like due south, due north, and certain declinations, you will start to get field rotation. So you'll actually see stars starting to trail if you go up to 60 seconds. Generally, you want to keep it under 30 seconds for an Alt-Az mount. And so that's the advantage of doing the shorter subframe exposures. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, maybe as much as 30 seconds. Next is the binning. So most cameras have the capability to bin. What that means is 1 by 1 means each pixel by itself reports back the photons it collects. If you do 2 by 2 binning, it gathers together the photons from an array of pixels 2 wide by 2 tall. So in other words, 4 pixels report the total accumulation of photons they receive as a single output. And don't worry, but the camera figures out how to get all the red, green, blue if yours is a color camera. We won't get into that. I don't expect that you'll want to bin. Usually leave this at 1 by 1. Then the long exposure mode we'll keep at long exposure. The high speed, I think, is for doing planetary imaging. So if we go here next to the save prefix, it will set up where you're going to save the images to. So you can choose what folder you want. You can choose to automatically click this, will automatically save the photos. You can create a date-based subfolder. You can set the sequence number, the file prefix, and so on and so forth. So this allows you to determine where your images go and how they're labeled. And then here you can save each of the files as a FITS type file. So if you're going to do a lot of live stacking, you want to be careful not to save all these files because it's going to chew up a lot of your memory in your computer. But if you want to use those files later, the individual files, to do some astrophotography, traditional astrophotography, that's why this is here. And if you were trying to do planetary imaging, then you might want to make this SER file in order to save thousands of frames, very short exposures. But here we're talking about deep sky objects. And generally, I don't like to save each of the files, but you can do it if you want. Here it'll tell you the number of images stacked, the total stacking time. This will start the live stacking. There's something called bad frame rejection. You can play with that. I suspect if you have satellite trails, this will get rid of those frames that have satellite trails. And then the next thing you want to do is decide, are you using a monochrome camera or you're using a color camera? And then you have to know the Bayer matrix. So for the ASI camera that I have, it's RGB RGB, and you see now I have red, green, and blue. If I had a camera that was something else, like this one here, I think is a Panasonic ASI 1600, it also brings up these red, green, and blue sliders. So this will allow you to adjust the color for the red, green, and blue channels. And then here's how we will be able to stretch the image, and we'll show you that here in a minute. So now we're going to do an actual live stacking session using the SkyX Live Stack software. I'm in my light polluted backyard, and the sky is fairly clear but not great, and there's a quarter moon, so that's interfering a little bit with the light pollution in the sky. Nonetheless, I think we can get a good idea of how easy this software is to use. And I'll remind you, I'm using my C11 with Hyperstar, and that puts me at f1.9. So a very fast system. So I have the SkyX up and running. I connected everything. I've got my camera connected, my focuser connected, my telescope connected, and I've already pre-aligned on a very easy target for this time of the year, the winter, which is M42, the Orion Nebula. So as I said before, you want to be in the camera tab where it says take photo and go to live stack. So here's the live stack software. We'll worry about calibration frames later. We're going to set this exposure at 5 seconds. I'm not going to bin, and I'm not going to automatically save these files, but we're not going to do that. We're just going to look at the live stack, and then I can use this export button down below to save the image as viewed. So this camera is a color camera. It's an ASI 2600, which is an APS-C frame sensor, which goes quite well with the C11 at f2. And you see the bare matrix for this camera is RGB, which is pretty common for most of the chips out there this day from Sony. And since I'm not going to save each FITS file, I will save the stacked image, and we'll use the export function here once we get going. So let's start. Again, 5 seconds, subframes. You see it's telling us the exposure, time left, and there it is. So it doesn't take long with this kind of aperture and focal ratio. You see the software is very simple to use. It really doesn't take a whole lot to get going. Now what you do see here, you see these are satellite trails. Anyone who's looked at the Orion Nebula with camera knows quite well that it's hard not to get subframes with satellite trails in it. But we can ignore that for now. So it continues to stack. We're up to 35 seconds with 7 frames. And we can use the scale here and slide it up. And now you can actually see the satellite trails come out pretty good. You see each one of these is a subframe that's being stacked, 5 seconds, 5 seconds. So they're all the same length. You see we've blown out the core, and we've brought a lot of the background noise up. So maybe that's a little too much. We can back off a little bit. Maybe too much there. You can do this to your liking. So here's the Orion Nebula, and this is another nebula over here. It has the shape of a running man, and that's what that nebula is commonly called. So you can play with your highlights, and you see that brightens up the bright parts of the image. A little too much, back it off. That looks much better to me. And then the scale stretches overall, and that's actually too much. So here come some more satellite trails. If for some reason you're not happy with the image that you've got going, say you didn't like these satellite trails, you could stop and then you could start this all over again. And it resets everything back to 0, and you'll see we'll start all over again. It doesn't move these sliders, so they stay exactly where they are. So you see the first frame, 5 seconds, very noisy. Lots of background noise. And there are still some satellite trails here. Now you can start to see what happens as the number of frames increases. The background noise begins to average out or smooth out. We're up to 20 seconds, 4 frames, and you can let it go as long as you like. You can continue to play with the highlights. You can adjust the color, so we can drop down the red. That doesn't look good to me. That's a little bit too blue and green. Bring the red back up. Usually this is not, default's not too bad. If I increase the green, you see that's too much green. So depending on your sky conditions, you might find that you need to make adjustments to this. And you do that to your heart's content. Now that made it more red. If you think that's what you like, you can leave it there. I think I'm going to give back a little bit. A little less green. That's one thing. These sliders are a little bit touchy. All right, we'll leave it there. So again, as we get more and more frames, we're up to 15 frames, the background begins to smooth out. And if you wanted to save this image, you would just hit export, and then it lets you pick where you're gonna store these. So I'm gonna store them here. I'm gonna call this M42 demo, and then you have a choice of how you save this file. So if you save it as a FITS file, it'll save separate red, green, blue channels. I'm just going to save it as a PNG, and that'll save it there. But as I said before, you could have clicked save each FITS file, and it'll save each subframe as a FITS file, which means it'll save a red, green, and blue file for each subframe, which you can manipulate later in some software to do your own astrophotography. But for the purposes of this demonstration, we're just talking about doing EAA, and that's basically live viewing. And we're not trying to get a really pretty astrophoto. We're just trying to see a lot of interesting stuff in real time, and you can see a lot of this nebulosity is coming out, and the background is really smoothing down, and the running man is becoming very, very clear. So let's stop this, and I'm going to close this for now. Okay, and then we're going to go to another object. So let's find the Horsehead Nebula, since that's close by, and we'll salute to that. It's not very far away. All right, and then I'm going to align this and center this, and we'll come back to the live stacking software. So I've aligned the Horsehead Nebula, and don't want to waste your time showing you that. I'm going to use the same 5-second exposures, the same binning. Have to set this back to RGB, and let's start. There we are at 5 seconds, and you can already begin to see the Horsehead itself and also the Flame Nebula over here. All right, now we can adjust the scale to bring out more, and of course that brings a lot of background noise, and there's another satellite trail. But you can clearly see the Horsehead Nebula, and we're seeing this in the first 5 seconds. And you see how easy this software is. If you bring this up a little more, we'll bring out more background noise. I think that's a nice place to leave it. Here we are at 50 seconds. So you already see an enormous amount. Again, if you have a 60 millimeter refractor, you're not going to get this much light, obviously, compared to an 11-inch SCT, but you'll still be able to use this software. Obviously, you'll have to take longer exposures to begin to see as much detail as we're seeing here. But the point of this demo is how easy it is to use this software. Let's export this one as well, and we'll call this the Horsehead Nebula demo. And again, I'm going to save this as a JPEG. Now you can also save this, and let's see what happens. We'll do this, and we'll call this 2, and we'll save this as a FITS file, 16-bit FIT file. Okay. All right, let's stop this one. Let's take a look at another deep sky object. All right, now we're going to take a look at the Rosette Nebula. And once again, I've already centered the target. And we're going to use 5-second subs again. And let's start. So there's the Rosette Nebula. I can use the scale to bring out more. But obviously you see with only 10 seconds of exposure, there's a lot of background noise. But that'll slowly average out, and the image will improve dramatically. Here we are at 20 seconds. Now you can also zoom in with a zoom in button. You can see some of the dark dust lanes here clearly. You can back out. This will bring you to full screen. Hit the escape key to go back. This will give you, it'll do an overlay. I don't want to do it. That makes it look like you're looking through an eyepiece. We're up to 55 seconds and looking pretty good now. So I'm going to export this. And when you hit the export, it stops the stacking where you are. And then once you're done with the export, it'll continue on. All right, so let's stop this one. All right, so here are the images I saved. So here's M42. Again, these are JPEG files. So see, you can save what you see on the screen. The Orion Nebula with the Running Man. This was the Horsehead Nebula. You see that? You see the satellite trails. And here's the Rosette Nebula. Okay, just as easy as that. And then here is the FITS file for M42, but you see there's actually 3 of them, red, green, and blue. So here's the red, and it's going to look like black and white. This is just the red pixels. And here would be the green. Again, you'll see the differences here are in the intensity at the different colors. So you see a lot of red, a lot less green, and then the blue, even less. It would be nice to take a look at some galaxies. Unfortunately, Andromeda is behind big pine trees in my backyard. It's not galaxy season, so there's not many other choices, but there is M81, M82, which I can see right now. Now, they're not ideal targets at this small of a focal length, so they'll be pretty small, but we'll be able to get them both in the same field of view. So I've already got those lined up. Let's start the stacking process. And there they are. There's M82, commonly called the Cigar Galaxy, and M81, Bode's Galaxy. Now, here we can use the zoom feature to zoom in. And let's get these centered a little bit. And now let's use the scale here to bring out a little more detail. This might be a little bit too red. Drop that down a little bit. And we can clearly see structure in these two galaxies. Let's let this run for a short while. And as it runs, you can see we're getting a smoother background and we're getting more detail. You certainly can see these outer arms on Bode's galaxy. So I'm going to let that run for a while, pause the video. All right, here we are, just a little over 5 minutes. And you can see we've brought out even more detail in Bode's galaxy. Let's look what happens if I increase the highlights. You'll see that the core of the galaxies blows out, so we don't want to get the highlights too high. Down a little bit, there we go. And then if we bring the scale up, we really wash out the background. And let me drop this down just a little bit. This is a good way to see vignetting, the effect of vignetting. So let me back this off. And now you can really see the vignetting. Essentially what's happening is as we collecting more light, we're seeing the difference in the light intensity down the center of the optical axis from the edges, especially the corners. And that can be corrected with flat frames. And if we saw a lot of bright pixels in here, hot pixels, we could get rid of that with dark frame subtraction. So let me stop this. And if you wanted to do either of those things, you would use this calibration frames tab. So you would have to first make your dark, and this tab will come up. It has to be the same exposure as you're using for your subframes, same binning. And if you have a cooled camera like I do, it'll pop up here, and I have it set at -10, so this camera's running at -10. It says basically the same thing here, and then you pick how many frames you want. And 16 is a pretty typical number, and it saves as a FITS file. And then you would start this, and what it would do is it would collect 16 frames with these settings, with the cover over. So if we say start, you'll see it say cover the scope, and click the OK button. So I'd have to run out to the observatory, cover the scope, and it will start collecting those 16 frames, and it would combine them into a single master dark frame. Let me abort that. Okay. And then when you want to use them, before you start your exposures, you would go here and say set dark, and there would be a file that you saved here, and that would be your dark frame, and you would open that, and it would use that. Now, flat frame's a little more complicated. A flat frame is made by pointing the telescope to a featureless part of the sky, no object there, no clouds. Do that at dusk or dawn. And a lot of people will put a cotton t-shirt over the top of that, stretch a cotton t-shirt over the front of your aperture to diffuse the light. So you would say make the flat, you'd go through the same procedure here, and it would make a flat for you. As it says here, the exposure will be adjusted to be less than 1/2 the full well of your camera. So point the optic at an area of the clear twilight sky or a light panel. Some people use a light panel. Anyway, those are not required, but they're not hard to do if you want to use those. So there you have it, the live stack feature in the SkyX Pro Edition. As I said in the beginning, I don't think there's any live stacking software that is simpler to use, that will not frustrate someone who is not tech savvy and doesn't want to work through all of the added features that you find in something like SharpCap. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not advocating spending almost $400 just to use this for live stacking. But as I said before, if you have other uses for the SkyX, which is a pretty good software package in itself with lots of very useful features, and you want to do EAA without muss or fuss, live stack feature will get you going very quickly. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you do, please don't forget to like the video. That helps other people like you find the video easily. And if you want to see more of my videos, you can always subscribe to this channel. And you can find lots of astronomy content, including equipment reviews, how-to blogs, and lots of my EAA photos with different cameras and scopes on my website, californiaskies.com.